Okay, and we're going to just wait for us to start streaming to Facebook before we get started. Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And if you're watching via Facebook, we did send the Zoom webinar link via email today to all parents and students. So if you didn't receive the link, definitely check your email, or if you're wanting to submit a question, you can definitely do that on our Facebook page in the comments. Otherwise, if you're joining us via the Zoom webinar, you can use the Q&A button to submit a question anytime during the presentation or during our Q&A session. I'm just going to go over a few webinar etiquettes before we get started. Again, you can submit questions through the Q&A button in the Zoom webinar or through Facebook comments. Due to time constraints, we may not be able to address every question today, but we will be using it to inform a future frequently asked question that will be posted on our website, which is www.CUHSD.org. If you are on the Zoom webinar, all lines will be muted and the chat and raise hand functions are disabled. And the webinar right now is being recorded. So if you are watching later on, you'll be able to see that. I'm going to go ahead and go into some introductions. My name is Sarah Foy. I'm the coordinator of community engagement and communications for Campbell Union High School District. And with me tonight, I have Superintendent Dr. Robert Bravo joining us, and also Board President Trustee Kaylin Gallagher. Thanks for joining us today. And to go ahead and kick us off, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Bravo for a few slides to share with our community tonight.
Thanks, Sarah. Let's go ahead and jump in. So I'm going to start just by talking a little bit about what kinds of preparations have already been underway, with the idea that we do want, to the extent possible, to have our schools open for some kind of in-person services for students. So for those of you that were with us in the spring, before the closure of schools, we had rented hand washing stations because we really wanted to make sure that stations like that were widely available. Since that time, we have purchased, and now the district owns a number of these units because we expect that we'll want them available over the long term. We have picked up different kinds of signage around proper hand washing, and those are being installed in our campuses. Next slide, please. Already, we have some people on site who are distributing PPE. We've started the installation of plexiglass shields in different parts of campuses. Next slide. We do have a stockpile of hand sanitizers and a number of PPE. We're going to have hand sanitizer wall-mounted units in every classroom in the district before the end of the year, as well as freestanding hand sanitizer delivery units at schools. Next slide, please. We've also done things like put markings in buildings, on the floors, to try and create pathways where we minimize congestion, like having people moving in a single direction down one walkway and another direction on the other. Next slide. And we're also doing things also around ventilation and HVAC to make sure that we are doing everything we can to meet the suggestions and the requirements from the Santa Clara County Department of Public Health. So in terms of physical plant, I feel very positive that we have what we need to have a return to in-person options after the winter break, if it is safe for us to do so. So I just wanted to review with everybody the results of the survey that we did just about 2 weeks ago. And what we saw is that there's a range of different levels of readiness on people's parts to return to campus. So we know that we have about 30% of staff who say they are comfortable returning to campus. On the other end of the spectrum, we have almost 60% of parents and guardians who said they were comfortable with their students returning to campus for some activities. And then the students actually falling somewhere in between those two groups, and about half and half. So what we're going to be needing to do, though, is that in order to plan for what we do in spring semester, we're going to have to go beyond surveys and really ask families to tell us what is your specific preference for your student or students. Next slide, please. So here's the timeline that we're looking at. Actually, starting tomorrow, we are going to start sending the notices out to our families to solicit the family's preferences for a distance learning or a hybrid instructional model for their students for the spring of 2021. When I say hybrid, what I'm referring to is a model in which there is some distance learning and some in-person learning. So we're going to collect that information starting tomorrow, and we'll give just about a week, just over a week, for families to give us that information. And then based on that information, it will give us the information necessary then to be able to formulate more specific options related to coming back to school. And I know that some folks might feel like, well, how do I know if I prefer the hybrid instructional model if I can't see all the details to it? And my answer is, we can't give you the details, unfortunately. Not complete details. We can give you some details, but we can't give you all the exacting details until we know how many people are interested in a hybrid model. And you can think about time on campus as being a limited commodity. There's only so much time that we can have students on campus. And because of social distancing requirements, they can't all be there at the same time. So the more families that are interested in a hybrid, then that limited commodity of time is going to be split between a greater number of people. And likewise, if few people want the option, then that limited commodity is being divided by fewer people. And we'll come back to that idea in a moment. But we're going to take the information that we have, and we are going to review it with our LCAP committee, which includes parents, students, staff members, and they're going to give us some input into the draft recommendation on November 16th. And then based on that input, that will give us a few days to finalize a specific recommendation to present to the board on December 1st at a special board meeting. And the next day, any kind of bargaining that may still need to be done with our labor partners would take place or begin. Next, please. So I do want to talk a little bit about the differences and expectations between elementary and secondary schools, because there are some very significant differences about what is expected of us by the Santa Clara County Department of Public Health. And this one figure, which is from their materials, demonstrates how they want secondary schools to be thinking about organizing versus elementary schools. So on the left-hand side, it says lower elementary grades. And then it moves towards the right to upper elementary, then middle, then high school. And so on this chart, what it shows is that when you're talking about younger elementary school age kids, it may be less feasible to limit close contact and have those kids faithfully wear face coverings. But it is more feasible to maintain stable cohorts. And what does stable cohort mean? It means having kids mixing with fewer people. The less mixing there is, the less chance there is of the spread of a virus. Elementary school lends itself to stable cohorts because in elementary school, as it is already, students spend their day with one teacher, with one group of kids, one teacher, and there is not interchanging. So when you look at the chart and you go to the right side where it talks about high school students are much more mature, and we have reason to believe that they can, although it would be hard for them, that they could do better at limiting close contact and wearing face coverings correctly. However, it is less feasible to maintain stable cohorts at the high school level. They have to change teachers. They often mix the groups of students that they're with. And so the organizing principle for doing learning, physical learning at the high school level is physical distancing and face coverings. We can see the next slide. So what does that mean then for us? What would a hybrid instructional model look like in our schools? Well, on the left-hand side, you see the typical classroom, and perhaps we have between 30 to 35 students in a class. Well, the social distancing requirements that the county has provided us with requires that students all be seated at least 6 feet apart from each other, 6 feet in all directions, front, back, to the sides. And our facilities team, we have met the measurements of all of our classrooms in the district. And we know that on average, based on the size of our classrooms, that really our classrooms can accommodate, with the physical distancing requirement, only 8 to 11 students per class at a given time. So in a hybrid model, depending on how many people were interested in the hybrid model, students who are coming for some in-person learning would still have to do some of the learning online. And that's why it is a hybrid, it would have to be a hybrid model. Next slide, please. So what does this potentially look like in practice? So the County Department of Public Health, as I mentioned, requires a separation of students with at least 6 feet in between desks. In this particular photo, and this particular photo is taken from the Del Mar High School gymnasium, where we do have some very limited services for students, and we call this a connectivity hub, where students who perhaps have a hard time connecting to the internet because of where they live, that they can come and they can have a place to work. These students are seated more than 6 feet apart. This is closer to 10 feet at Del Mar, but this gives you a little bit of an idea of what it could look like. You can't see it here, but each desk also has a plexiglass screen around it. But one of the things that the County Department of Public Health, while they require the 6 foot distance, they also encourage that desks all face in the same direction. So this gives you a sense perhaps of what it could look like. Next slide, please. So there are two main ways we could potentially get to a hybrid design. Both, on this slide at the top, it says both require an A-B split to achieve DPH recommendations. Let me explain what that means. DPH is Department of Public Health. It's another acronym that we've all had to learn in the last few months. But when it says A-B split, what that's trying to say is an A-B split is talking about it's assuming you could have half the students on campus at a given time. So that's an A-B split. The first half and then the second half. In reality, as I mentioned, because of the dimensions of our classrooms and size of classes, we could require much greater than an A-B split. We could need an A group, a B group, and a C group, maybe even a D group. So as I mentioned earlier, it matters how many folks want to participate in a hybrid model. The more people that want to participate, the more subgroups we would need. So taking that into consideration, how would we actually do a schedule? Well, there's two ways, chief ways to do a schedule, and there are variations off these, but these are the two that we see that are most in use in those parts of the country and our state where there is some hybrid instruction happening. And these are the two models specifically that we know that some of the high schools in Orange County are using or planning to use. And we will have a very small team of staff going to Orange County next week to walk through some of these campuses to see how these things are working in practice. Because we've all thought about these things theoretically. Our district's own reopening steering committee had plans for hybrid learning that they made back in June. But there are schools that are actually living out these plans right now. They haven't been doing it for long, maybe just a few weeks, but they're a little bit ahead. And so we want to learn from that. So let me talk more about the two models then. So one way you can create a schedule for a hybrid model would be through a reorganization. So in this model, what happens is that we take the students and we find out who wants to have a hybrid program and who wants to remain distance learning. And then we take the distance learning students and in effect, we create their own school for them, for lack of a better term. And we pair them with staff who specifically are going to serve students through that distance learning method. And then for those students that want the hybrid method, we pair them with staff who are going to focus on the hybrid method. The upside to that model is the idea that staff are focused on serving a particular student in a particular kind of context. Either I'm focusing on students doing a hybrid model or focusing on students who are remaining distance. There are some big impacts, though, of this model because it requires changes in master schedule, which means that potentially students would not be able to have the same teachers or the same classes in the order they have them. And potentially some classes would need to be canceled to achieve it. Potentially. The other model is to have something different, to have what's sometimes called concurrent or simultaneous instruction happening. In this model, the teachers are in the classroom. The subset of students whose families have chosen hybrid, they're also in the classroom. And for those students then and families that are asking to remain on distance learning, they are watching a live feed from the classroom. So what is appealing about this model is that there is no change in schedules, master schedule, the course offerings, that all stays the same. Should at some point in the future, if we were to start in-person learning under this model and then had to shut back down to all distance learning, and then we're invited to reopen again for in-person, it's much easier to do it from the concurrent or simultaneous model than with the reorganization model. The impact, however, or the downside of the concurrent or simultaneous model is it causes teachers to have to split attention, addressing and who are they going to address or prioritize? The students in front of them, the students who are maybe watching the live stream, and potentially are they asking questions of those students? Are they just asking questions of the students in front of them? It's just a very different experience than I think almost any of our instructors would have had in the past. So it's definitely has a potential to be a workload and student supervision issue for our staff. So next slide. So before we go to the questions, so I'm going to go back to how I mentioned that families are going to be asked to let us know, do they prefer a hybrid model or would they prefer to stay in distance learning? For those families that do not respond, because we're going to ask families to do an online form similar to what was done for school registration. And for those who, for whatever reason, do not do that form, we're going to assume that the interest is status quo or to continue with distance learning. I want to stress that whatever preference is indicated, we cannot guarantee that the option will actually be there. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the information necessary so that if there can be a hybrid program, that we can specifically tell those folks more details about what the exact schedule would look like. And that depends again on how many people have that interest. But these preferences are not guarantees. We cannot guarantee that we are going to have a hybrid program yet. That decision is still forthcoming. And anything you think that maybe I skipped past, Sarah? Or Kaylin? Trustee Gallagher, President Gallagher?
No, I think, well, they'll probably come out in the questions, so.
Okay.
All right, thanks so much. And I just want to address, I know several parents had said in our Facebook comments that they did not get a link to the Zoom webinar, and we apologize. We'll research and find out why some parents did not get that email from earlier this afternoon, and we apologize and figure out why that happened to make sure it doesn't happen again. But it did get to some because we do have a couple attendees here tonight. So thank you so much for joining via Facebook or via our Zoom webinar. So I'm going to actually go ahead and get started with some questions that we already had populated from a Facebook post that we did yesterday. And I think, Bob, you kind of addressed this question already in your presentation, but if students were going to continue with distance learning, would they be able to maintain their current schedules or classes, or does it really depend on the hybrid schedule that is selected?
It could depend on whether or not there is a hybrid program and the kind of hybrid program that it is.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Kaylin a question, Board President Kaylin. What plans or timelines are being developed for second semester, and what county guidelines are kind of being used to inform decisions for the board, and kind of what factors go into the decision-making process for trustees?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So just to kind of take a step back, right? Over the summer, we had to basically decide what the fall was going to look like. And there were kind of really two big decisions on the table, right? One was have some decision point like in the middle of fall semester, or commit to distance learning through January. And as you remember, the board decided to commit to distance learning through January. I think that ended up being the right call because no public school district in our county has high schools operating or with a plan to operate before January. And what happened in the districts that had a decision point in the middle of the semester is that there wasn't a full commitment to distance learning because there was this hope that things were going to come back. And then there was a battle from day one, right? That I think distracted from the goal of doing the best we can with what we've been dealt. So that puts us in a place now where what do we do and what does a timeline look like? There are definitely parents who want to know now what things are going to look like in January. And that's totally understandable, right? All that said, though, I think the board is trying to give our staff enough time to learn about what's happening in other districts, watch what's happening on the ground, see how the different recommendations from the county or the guidelines from the county, the rules from the county, how those change, and give us a chance to get kids back in person if that is possible. There's one district in our county today, in fact, this week announced that they are not coming back unless there is a widespread vaccine. So basically they're not coming back in the spring. There are others that have said they're coming back, but don't have a ton of plans around it yet. Or when they say that, what they're really saying is they're going to let their elementary school kids back, but don't really have the full plan for high school yet, right? And so it's easy to get excited by those announcements and those headlines, but it's not, when you really dig in and talk to people who are involved, it's not quite there yet. So I think that's context for what our board has said. We are going to make a decision one way or another on December 1st. That's when our meeting is. We have a special board meeting. In the meantime, we have expectations of staff that this is going to be a time of intense planning and intense learning. And I think each board member is also taking that responsibility as well. I know there are some board members who are going to visit some private high schools that are open, some public high schools outside the county. I know everyone is reading every article that can come out because we have to make a decision that is best for kids and that is also grounded in safety and science. And to that effect, every single meeting, every single day, we're basically getting new information, trying to make an informed decision. And go from there. So I don't actually remember the initial question, but that's kind of the context of where we're at and the expectation the board has set of our staff. I will also add that we really do have an amazing staff that is working around the clock. Our teachers have had to reinvent everything. Our administrators, our district office staff are all working almost around the clock to make sure that we have really good options presented to us on the 1st. So yeah, that's what I got.
Thanks, Kaylin. Another question that came in through our Q&A webinar is, and I'm going to toss it over to Superintendent Bravo, is what are the plans or the procedures in place if a student or staff gets sick, if we're in a hybrid model, and kind of what are the screening procedures that would need to be in place, because students might still come to work sick come to school sick, and staff might still come to work sick. What are the procedures in place to kind of combat things like that?
Yeah, thank you. So the procedures that we would use are those that are provided directly to us by the Santa Clara County Department of Public Health. And, they have, let's see, I have it right here. I made a copy of it just so I have it handy. They even provide us, a sheet, and I have my self view off, so I guess I better. Okay, so they have this sheet where you pick the scenario. So what is happening? So scenario 1, student or staff exhibits one or more symptoms. And then there's a flow chart. What do we do? There's a scenario 2. And so basically right now, we are, and this is publicly available on the internet. Anyone can go and pull this from the Santa Clara County Department of Public Health and look at it in detail. And just for those of you who are really interested in that kind of a thing. But we are carrying out trainings with our site staff, administrators, classified support staff, etc., so that they can follow these procedures. And they've designated a place that will be an isolation room if somebody does come to school and demonstrates symptoms. So we would just be following those directions very much to the T.
Thank you. One of the questions that came through the Facebook comments is if students would be able to revert back to full distance learning at any point, or is once the decision is made, if they have to stick with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And right now my answer would be, and I'm not sure this is one to take to the bank, but my answer would be that I would foresee that we would try to accommodate such requests, but once a period of hybrid learning started, and if someone had selected that, the potential would be that they would need to stick with it for the term.
And one question that came through also through the Facebook comments and is around Santa Clara County's Public Health Department saying that schools should or can reopen. And I think, you know, this might be something that, you know, you meet with the county public health department and also our county district leaders as well. And can you speak to what the guidance really has been from the county? Because I think it's more around like you can open, but not necessarily that you should. And can you speak a little bit to what they've said about that for especially high schools?
Sure, absolutely. The County Department of Public Health has said, and they have given us the indication that they're going to continue to take the position that they are not going to tell schools when they should reopen. They're going to keep their guidance to the issue of, well, these are when schools absolutely cannot reopen. And if they are, and then when schools can reopen, these are the things that they need to do. And in their guidance, which is likewise like the scenarios I showed with the protocols, it's available on their website. And in their guidance, they have two kinds of guidance they provide us. One set is called requirements. You must do these things if you're having an open school. The second is recommendations, things that they think would be a good idea, but are not absolutely required. I can say that based on that document, that we would be prepared not only to do all the requirements, but the majority, like 80 to 90% of the recommendations right now. But again, the County Department of Public Health, they have taken the stance, they're not going to tell school districts when to come back, but that at such time that they elect to do that, how they need to do it. And that is one of the difficult things, I'm sure, for folks is, you know, if you're like me, you drive down the street on your way home after work, and maybe you drive by downtown Campbell and there's all kinds of people out at restaurants, and we know that restaurants are opening for indoor dining, although with 25% capacity. So that's very similar to what the schools would have to be under. But it does beg the question, as these other things open, why isn't everything open? But you know, one of the comments that I have heard from the department is sometimes is they'll say, just because something is allowable doesn't mean you should do it. And so, you know, we're just trying to as President Gallagher said, we're just trying to take the information and do the best we can, and to get input from our stakeholders about what we ought to do.
Thank you, Dr. Bravo. This question I'm going to pose to first Trustee Gallagher, and then if Bob wants to join as well. There was a question around what can we do as a community or administration, parents, teachers, and students to keep students and teachers engaged in distance learning environment? And what can parents do to help students who are struggling academically or with social emotional learning in this environment? How do we better improve our current distance learning program now, and also like in the future, if that is something that is continued to be made available to students?
Yeah, and just so I got it, it's how parents can help within this model or any of these models.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm part of my background is I'm a former middle school teacher. I taught 7th and 8th grade social studies in East San Jose, and I actually during my time did some hybrid type learning with a student who was not able to access the classroom due to a health condition. And I taught on a webcam for 3 months. I think what really helped that student thrive was parents who were there for him emotionally. I think and really checking in and giving the supports, because it is really isolating to be behind a Zoom screen all day. I know I experience it at work. You can get burnt out really easily. So I think it's all the same things that make you a successful parent, you know, during a traditional school year. It's just, it's having to put that extra emphasis on it this year, and the special attention to it. I think, you know, all the studies show an engaged parent helps out students so much in whatever mode of learning it is. So continuing that.
Thank you. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that one, Dr. Bravo?
Yeah, yes, there is. Thank you. One of the things that I've heard from, you know, a number of instructors is how much they're concerned about how students can become disconnected when they choose not to have the camera on. And that's one of those things where I totally understand that there are times when the camera does need to be off. But parents, if you have your student who is in situations where you think it's perfectly appropriate for them to have the camera on and they're choosing not to, that could be something that you might want to think about is, you know, are you monitoring how much that they are being on camera? Because, you know, I'm going to confess, when I'm on Zoom and I don't have my camera on, I'm not as engaged in what's happening. So, and if that's what I'm doing as an adult, just think what our students are doing, because they are the masters of the multitasking and doing other things at the same time. The other thing I want to talk about, the idea of improving distance learning, is that whether or not we offer a hybrid instruction program, what we are already doing is we are already expanding opportunities for students to be able to connect with the campuses in limited ways. So I know that today at Prospect, I think was a Halloween parade. Lee High School is doing a drive-through haunted house, which I understand is sold out. And so those are some activities that are happening. We have some different sports where coaches are working with athletes. There's not athletic contests, but they're working on conditioning. And you know, we have some, like we saw the photo of the support hub at Del Mar. Del Mar was the first, but the other campuses, they also, Branham has a support hub. Lee's support hub is starting next week. So I think that trying to create those opportunities could be very helpful. I meet with a group of about 15 students that is called the Superintendent Student Advisory Council. And, you know, I have asked them just sort of as a flash poll, hey, how many of you guys would like to do a hybrid model when we come back from winter break? I have to tell you, I was surprised. It wasn't half of them. It was like 2 out of the 15 that said yes. The vast majority of them said, you know, we've kind of gotten used to the distance learning. Now, this is not a representative sample because the students on my advisory committee tend to be involved in leadership and other things like that. But what they said was, well, we feel like we're starting to get the hang of the distance learning, but what we really want to come back for is we want to come back for activities or meeting with clubs or support services. Maybe it's counseling to receive some counseling in person. But the instruction is not necessarily what they want to come back for. So I know that the decisions are going to be based, though, student by student, family by family.
Thanks, Dr. Bravo. There are a lot of questions around scheduling, and I think you had referenced in one of the models, that the reorganization model, that there would possibly need to be different schedules for students. If that model was selected, do you have an estimated timeline of when families would be notified of that change and what their student schedules would look like?
If that was a model that that the board ended up selecting, then families would be informed as soon as possible. That's all I can say. You know, it's going to take at least 2 weeks, you know, to do the rescheduling, probably 3. So they would definitely know before having to come back, or at the beginning of the program, but it would take several weeks.
And I think also a lot of the questions around, like, would it be 4 days a week, 2 days a week? What would that look like? And I think, as I think you might have mentioned earlier, is we have to solicit what the need is and what our community is wanting as far as a hybrid or continued distance learning. And then that's kind of the next step to be able to figure out what that schedule would look like. Because obviously the more families that say they want hybrid, the less days that they would be able to, you'd be able to accommodate it because of the physical distancing requirements that we're under.
Yes, right.
And also one question that came through is, if a hybrid model is decided, would certain student groups be prioritized to participate in in-person learning, or certain grade levels maybe would get it first, or how would that be determined?
Yes, that is an option. And when we did the survey of parents and students and teachers a couple of weeks ago, that was discussed, and we did see that a majority of all 3 groups did support some kind of prioritization. So that would be part of whatever recommendation that I gave to the trustees on December 1st. If there should be any kind of a prioritization, I would say that, you know, I believe that if we were to prioritize students, what makes the most sense to me would be students with disabilities and freshmen.
And also, I just wanted to reiterate to families, in case you tuned in a little bit late into the webinar, that we are planning on sharing a letter out to families tomorrow to solicit their preference on a hybrid versus a distance learning model. Right now, it's not an indication of what will be made available next semester, but it's so that we can have a more solidified view of what families' preferences are. So please be on the lookout for that. And one of the questions too that I'll give to Bob is, if a hybrid model is selected, does that mean that all families have to participate, or they still will have an option to stay in distance learning if that's what fits the needs of their student?
Yeah, I believe that they will always have the option for distance learning.
Perfect. And also another question that came through in the Facebook comments is, if a hybrid model is selected, would there be an option for there to be a 5-day in-person schedule for students, or would it probably be closer to 1 or 2 days a week, or does it really ultimately depend on how many students utilize that model?
It depends heavily on how many students would want to utilize the model.
And then one other question that came through is around air filters, and I think that you referenced it briefly during your presentation, but can you speak a little bit to what the district's current ventilation is like in the classrooms, and how ventilation would work if we have students on campus?
Well, as many of you may know, the Board of Trustees undertook a program a few years ago to make sure that there was air conditioning in all classrooms. And because of that, we have a lot of relatively newer units in place. And so for those of you who follow along and read the press on this, or have seen the county guidance, they make reference to the quality of air filters, and they recommend having a quality of MERV 13 or above. And I apologize, I could not tell you what MERV means right now, but our units and many of the standard that people might have, like in a home or et cetera, are MERV 8. But it is possible our units can accept the MERV 13. Some units can't. Older units often have a problem with a MERV 13 filter, because it demands more from the unit to be able to push and pull air through a tighter filter. But we believe that we can deploy MERV 13 in our units, and that's the plan right now.
Great. So a couple of questions that came in through the webinar are related to AP classes. And I know that when we talked about the reorganization model, that there is that risk that if there is, you know, it doesn't align up, if classes may need to be canceled. And the question is there any risk of having AP classes canceled spring semester? Is the district prepared to help support AP students if AP teachers get sick and cannot teach, since there usually is only one AP teacher per subject? Can you speak a little bit to what the schedule might look like for AP classes, or how that will be determined in the scheduling?
Yeah, thank you for that. So in both kinds of models, what we've seen from the experience from other schools that are using either the reorganizational model or the concurrent model is that both of them often do come with a price tag, because they end up needing to hire some additional staff, additional teachers specifically, to make them work. So the model of reorganization seems like it is a much higher number of new teachers that districts that are looking at that think that they believe that they will have to hire. The number is lesser for the concurrent model, but we definitely would see either way probably having to pick up some additional teachers.
Another question that has come up a couple times over the course of our planning for this school year is around outdoor classes and what our capability would be for something like that based on the facilities that we have.
Yeah, I think some limited capacity to do some outdoor classes. We do. I think, again, is that capacity enough to meet demand? That's part of what we need to learn.
Right, and one thing that has come up in the comments as well is, and I think we kind of referenced a little bit of the need or urge to want to expand those connectivity hubs to also include different levels of academic support. If we do not move to a hybrid model, what kind of remediation support will we be offering students who maybe aren't being successful with distance learning?
Yeah, thank you for that. And the Board of Trustees, when they did approve, I think it was last meeting or the meeting before, we had a job description for support hub tutors. So we're trying to build up a pool right now so that even if there is not instruction on campuses, that the connectivity hubs are more than just a place to work and be connected, that we could actually have some tutors on site to do some tutoring.
And then this question I'm gonna have Kaylin, Trustee Kaylin Gallagher possibly weigh in on is, we've seen other school districts throughout the state of California already decide to reopen. Can you talk a little bit around why our county, in particular, public high schools, have not really moved towards reopening just yet in comparison to possibly high schools in Orange County or other counties in our state?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. At the core of it is that there's no public high schools in our county that are open or planning to open before New Year's. Part of it, and I think a big part of it, is what is allowed in your county as put forth by your public health officer, right? So you can imagine a fake county, and this is not a reference to any real county, but to say, oh yeah, your schools can open, but you can have 3 kids per class, right? That's not realistic. And in that world, it wouldn't make any sense to reopen. So when you think about realistic counties in our state, right, there are ones that are a little more restrictive, and then ones where there's not that much community spread of COVID-19, and they're able to say, yeah, you can jam 25 kids in a classroom, and that's okay. And I think when you look at counties like to the north of Sacramento or in Orange County, typically they have guidelines and rules from their counties that are a little less restrictive. So I think that's part of it, right? Yeah, Dr. Bravo, does that feel?
Yeah, I think that's true, is that it depends on county for sure. And also, you know, there was a study, I think that came out even just last week with some strong correlations even between how different localities vote and whether or not they have reopened. So there's all kinds of factors that go into that difference.
And I think you might have kind of touched upon this earlier in the presentation, but this comment might have came in after the fact is what is kind of delaying us from making a decision right now? Like what goes into making that kind of decision, and really why would we not return before New Year's, or why would we wait to make that kind of decision? And I'll first give that to Board President Kaylin Gallagher as a member of our Board of Trustees, and see if Bob would like to also join in on that answer.
Yeah, so the board did decide to remain in distance learning throughout the fall semester at the beginning of this school year, right? And the reason, there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the core reasons was if we're going to be in distance learning, and instead of creating these artificial timelines where you get in these big battles for 3 weeks and you go one way or another and then go in these other 3 weeks and go in these big battles, I think what we've seen is that's been really disruptive for kids and for teachers and for staff, and really taken away from the mission, right? So is distance learning as good as in-person learning? No, right? But being able to say we're committing to this over this period of time, and this is what's going to be, and we're going to do the best we can, ultimately is the board, I think, decided is better for kids. And then in terms of why aren't we deciding today, right? Because there is a district that has already said they're not going back at all next school year, or in the spring semester in our county. They said they're not going back, right? To make that decision in October seems a little, personally, I'm not speaking for the board, seems a little silly to me, right? My grandfather once taught me, you never want to be the guinea pig, right? But you never want to be the last to something either. And so I think our board wants to give our staff time to learn, to plan, to take input from everyone who needs to give input, so that we can have the best option and the highest chance of going back in person that's possible, to the extent that it's safe for everyone involved. Frankly, a month ago, the world was a different place, and it's going to look radically different in a month as well. And so to like make that decision today doesn't allow us to have all the data points that we need. And I understand that is probably frustrating because you want to know exactly what's going to happen. But hopefully this is one where patience is a virtue, and we'll come out on top.
And one other question that this one might be more for Dr. Bravo is, can we have more students in class if we have plexiglass divisions between the students? And is that feasible and an affordable option?
Regardless of plexiglass, the 6-foot rule is still in effect, whether or not there's plexiglass.
Mm-hmm. There is one comment in the Facebook comments about having these sessions start a little bit later, and that is definitely some feedback that we can take back to have for future sessions. Thank you for your feedback on that. One other question that came through is, would siblings from the same family be allowed to choose different models?
Yes.
And I'm still looking for additional Facebook comments or questions in here, so you guys can continue to do that. We'll probably stay on for a couple more minutes. There was a question around our construction, that we know that since we've been in distance learning, that there has been a ramp up of construction to get as many projects as we can done while students are not on campus. Would construction be a hindrance to students returning, or would it make it so that it isn't as quiet when students return?
That's a great question. The answer is no. We do not believe it would be a hindrance. My facilities team right now informs me that the work is happening right now, is all on schedule, and we should have all classrooms available at second semester.
And if I could jump in, part of the reason, as soon as we knew that we were not going to go back in August, right? It opens up some more possibilities to move things up and save y'all a little bit of money on the Measure A bond. And I think historically, we've had tons of construction going on at our sites for a long time. And I think to the extent that we can, our staff really tries to make sure that school hours are quiet time, right? Obviously, there are times when that is not going to be the case, or projects where that can't be possible, but we've definitely had people doing shifts, 2 shifts after school, really trying to make sure our schools are a place that kids can focus.
Great. I'm going to send you a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. A couple that came through the webinar is, if we chose the reorganization strategy for spring semester, have you considered the impact that changing teachers would have on students? Many students have built bonds and connections with their teachers and run the risk of becoming disconnected with any change in schedule. Is that something that kind of weighs on that decision making for you, Dr. Bravo, and also Board President Gallagher?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think it's with all of this, right? This is before my current job, I built a startup, which is a logistical, it's crazy when you have millions of people using an app and a site that you've built, right? This is a much bigger logistical challenge, right? Some have said it's a logistical nightmare, but it's not an insurmountable one either, right? It's just, you have to take in all the different data points, all the different opinions, all the different factors, and try to come up with a plan that's going to be best for the most amount of people possible. So I think with all of this, right, there are definitely pros and cons to every single thing that we do. But I can assure you there are a lot of really passionate, caring people thinking through those things.
Right. And I think Dr. Bravo has said on multiple occasions is to always assume good intentions for everybody, no matter what their, opinion is for their student or for schools, is assume good intentions, and that, parents who want their kids to return want what's best for their students, versus also teachers being hesitant to return, wanting, still having good intentions as well. So I think that is where we're going to end it for now. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try to answer it in the comments afterward. And we'll also have it be a part of our frequently asked questions that we'll post it on our website. I just wanted to toss it over one more time to Dr. Bravo or Board President Gallagher to see if there's any final words that you'd like to share with our community before we log off.
I'd just say, just stay tuned.
Yeah, and I'll jump in and say thank you for participating in this. I think that one of the things that is great about being a school district here is that we have so many amazing community members who are very, very smart and have lots of they come with a lot of research, and they come with a lot of opinions and problem or solutions to problems. So to the extent that you can stay involved and keep emailing the board or participating in surveys or joining these, please do. The second thing I'd say is that we do not operate by ourselves. There are a lot of different levels of government that impact what we can do. And so although it is great to be involved here, and probably the most important place to be involved, I would not discourage you from also letting your opinions be known with other levels of government, whether it's state, at the county, at city level, about what your expectations are of them as well during this, because we're all doing it together. And I think sometimes that they don't hear the passion or urgency that we get to hear as a trustee. So make your voice heard.
Thank you. And just to reiterate a couple points, that the message will be shared, or form will be shared with parents tomorrow to be able to determine their preference for a hybrid or a distance learning model for spring. So look out for that. We will continue to have more live Q&A sessions via Facebook and Zoom. And so look out for more information about that coming out as well. And that's pretty much all we have time for tonight. Be on the lookout. We'll keep you guys informed and engaged throughout this whole decision-making process, as we have in the past couple months as well. So thank you so much for being a part of this, and for your comments and questions. We really appreciate you giving input and feedback right now. So thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.